Am I live? Hi. Wait. Am I live? Wait. Oh, okay. uh, Sorry, there was some technical difficulties with my computer. Hi. Welcome to Ask a Curator, hosted by the Clarke Museum. My name is Alexandra Cox. You can call me Alex. I am the registrar for the Clarke Historical Museum. So if this is your hi, if this is your first time here, you can talk to me and ask me questions by using the comment section. So for this chat, I'm going to give a little bit of background information about myself, and then how I ended up at the Clarke Historical Museum, and what it means to be a registrar, and what I do at the Clarke, and things like that. So, hi Katie. I have been at the Clarke Historical Museum for almost 5 months, 4 months, 4 months now. 4 months. Yeah, it's been 4 months. Awesome. I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology with an emphasis in archaeology. I also have a master's degree in applied anthropology and a certificate in museum studies, all through Humboldt State University. So, if you can't tell, I have extensive background in anthropology, and that's how I started my academic career in anthropology. Um, and that was due in large part to a man named Jamie Roscoe. Uh, when I was in high school, I went to Eureka High. I took a class taught by a professor named Jamie Roscoe, and the class was called Intro into Anthropology. So it was probably 50% the professor and 50% the subject matter, for the reason that I fell in love with anthropology. So when I graduated high school and went to college, I went to Humboldt State, and I immediately jumped into the anthropology department. So for if you don't, for those of you that don't know, anthropology is essentially the study of humankind. It's the study of man. Um, it's, the study of human societies and cultures and their development, and the study of human biology and physiological characteristics, and our evolution. Looking at the comment section. Yeah, I don't know if Katie left a comment. It's so cool that you had an anthropology class in high school. Yes, it was cool. I don't know if they still have the anthropology class at Eureka High, but it was there when I was there. And so anthropology is the study of humankind, and that's a very large discipline. There are actually 4 subfields. There's biological anthropology, cultural anthropology, linguistics, and archaeology. So let me give you a little bit of information about the 4 subfields. Biological anthropology is also called physical anthropology. It's concerned with the biology and behavioral aspects of human beings and their extinct hominin ancestors and the related non-human primates, particularly from an evolutionary perspective. For cultural anthropology is concerned with the study of human societies and their cultures and their development. Cultural anthropologists like to observe how cultural systems organize and shape the physical and social world around them, and then in turn how that shapes those ideas, behaviors, and physical environments. Um, Linguistic anthropology is pretty self-explanatory. It's the study of languages, the study of the relationship between languages and the cultures that create them through time. Um, and then the last subfield, archaeology, which is the field that I went into. Um, Archaeology documents and explains the origins and developments of human culture, tries to understand, cultural history, chronicles cultural evolution, and studies human behavior and ecology for both prehistoric and historic peoples. um, it's usually based on the physical remnants of the past cultures and former conditions of contemporary cultures, usually found buried underground or underwater. So, I'm just reading from my notes here. um, so, essentially, what anthropologists and all the four subfields focus in on is trying to understand the human condition both culturally and biologically. So, that's my overview of anthropology. Um, so when I went into university, and I jumped into the anthropology department, I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to, which of the subfields I wanted to go into. I knew it was either going to be biological anthropology or archaeology because I wasn't interested in linguistics, and cultural anthropology usually required talking to and engaging in large groups of people, which kind of makes you want to run screaming for the hills. So, but again, I was inspired by Jamie Roscoe, who lectured at HSU in archaeology, and he also worked at the Cultural Resources Management firm um, in the HSU Anthropology Department. Cultural Resources Management firms, or CRMs, are usually they're full of private contractors, private contract archaeologists, and they go out and they do archaeological work for whatever reason that they're contracted for, usually doing survey work or excavation work where people want to build a road or they want to build a house. That's really simplistic, bare bones right there. But the uh, the anthropology department through HSU has a cultural resource management, a CRM, um, in the department, and Jamie Roscoe used to work for them. So while I was at HSU getting my degree in archaeology, I volunteered a lot with the CRM. And I can remember my very first excavation I went out on. It was with the CRM, and we went out to the historical logging town of Falk. So Falk is out in the Headwaters Forest Reserve. It's off of the Elk River Road. It's pretty cool. It's an old logging lumber town. You can actually go out and visit it now. You can do like a self tour, and you got to hike out there, and they have trails, and you can see things, and they have little plaques, and you can read about all the stuff there. It's pretty cool. Um, so my very first experience was going out with Jamie um, to Falk, and it's Humboldt County, so it was cold and damp and wet and raining. And we're out there, and we're learning how to do survey work. So we're learning how to, we're learning how to map. And oh, let me trying to read the comments here. Oh, Katie asks, are there ways for non-students to volunteer with the CRM to do surveys? Um, I know that you can apply for a job at the CRM, but I don't know if they take non-students as volunteers. Um, they take a lot of volunteers, but they've always been students with HSU. So I'm not quite sure if they will take volunteers that are not students, but I do know that you can apply for a job at the CRM at HSU. So it's definitely something that can be asked. You can contact the CRM through the anthropology department. If you go on to the Humboldt State website and you go to the anthropology department and you click on, they should have a connection to the CRM there, and you could contact them and ask if they do outside volunteers. But I'm not quite sure about that. Anyway, so Falk was my first experience with doing fieldwork in archaeology. And that's really the best way to learn how to do archaeology is fieldwork. So we learned how to do survey and we learned how to do excavation. And archaeology is a science. We don't go out and just randomly dig holes in the ground looking for buried treasure. Uh, so we learned how to, set up our own little excavation unit, and depending on, the type of site you're excavating and what you're hoping to find, it will determine the size of your excavation unit. But we started with, 1 meter by 1 meter, and oh, how did the study of Dana is asking, how did the study of anthropology lead to being registrar? I am getting to that. So my story will eventually lead to how I got into registrar work. But so while I was getting my bachelor's degree in archaeology, I did a lot of volunteer work at the CRM, and I also went on to do the field schools. The anthropology department has a couple of field schools. One of them is hosted in Belize. It's called the Belize Archaeological Field School. It's run by Professor Marisol Cortez Rincon, and it was a wonderful experience. I did it for 3 years straight, and the field school is hosted. The camp is in central Belize. It's in a reserve, and the camp hosts a number of universities. HSU was only one of them. So what Professor Marisol was interested in studying was not the large Mayan sites with the large temples and the palatial structures. What she was interested in is all of the little townships and the little suburbs outside of the main cities, because we don't really have a lot of information about just the regular people, the day-to-day stuff. So it was a very rewarding experience of being able to go out, out of the country to Belize to do archaeological field schools, archaeological excavation. I learned a lot. So during the last year of my bachelor's degree, and I'm close to graduating, I'm sort of wondering what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. Do I want to pursue a career, a job in archaeology, which usually means you either go into academics or you become a contractor with a CRM, or you could go into the state and national parks have archaeologists that work for them. So, I was wondering what I was going to do, if I was going to go into any of those fields. And the HSU introduced a new master's program. It's called the Applied Anthropology Master's Degree Program. And it just started up as I was graduating. So I looked into it, and I was very interested. So what applied anthropology is they're anthropologists who work to solve real world problems by using anthropological methods and ideas. So, for example, they could work in communities helping solve problems related to health or education or the environment or something like that. So, I mean, um, they could go into medical research or forensics or education or community studies, and they use anthropological methods and experiences and apply them to those situations. And a lot of applied anthropologists go into like activists. They try to help um, solve real world problems. So I was intrigued, and one of the um, one of the like offshoots that you could do with in applied anthropology is museum work. And I was intrigued because I love museums, and I'd always thought of it as a hobby, as something that an activity I love to engage in. I love to go out and visit museums. If I travel, I always visit a museum of wherever I'm going. Um, and I had learned during my last year in my bachelor's, doing my bachelor's, that HSU had a museum studies program, and I didn't realize until then because the museum studies program is through the art department, and the art department is on the other side of campus from the anthropology department. So didn't really know it was there until I had a friend tell me about it. So I got into the master's program for applied anthropology, and I talked to my advisor, who was Dr. Mary Scoggin, and I said, hey, I know I have a background in archaeology, but I would love to go into doing museum work. And she thought that was brilliant and wonderful. And so um, while I was getting my master's in applied anthropology, I also got into the museum studies program, and it was it was definitely an amazing experience. So the museum studies program was being run by Dr. Um, Michelle McCall Wallace, and um, what we did is, we learned about, all the little nitty gritty details that goes into museum work, whether that's, administration or exhibit work. We did all of it. One of the great things about the Museum Studies program at HSU is that they have a lot of galleries on campus, and the Museum Studies program students get to run the galleries, or help. We set up exhibits and we take down exhibits and we learn about all the things that go into it. So it was really enlightening, and I enjoyed it. And one of the best things about the Museum Studies program, is that we get to do internships. So my internship was with the Morris Graves Museum of Art here in Eureka. Um, um, and the curator is Jemima, and I learned a lot underneath her. Um, they had us as interns. We start out learning about docent work. I mean, whenever you go into a museum, you usually start learning um, what goes into being a docent, and then you kind of work your way up from there. Um, so I learned a lot at the Morris Graves Museum of Art. How the art museum is run, how they set up their exhibits, how they, you know, um, they do a lot of outreach and education, and that was interesting to learn about. So while I was doing my museum studies program, I was also getting my master's degree, and the master's program, I was part of the very first class for the master's program in applied anthropology, and there was almost 20 of us. It was a small class. We were the first ones, um, and what what they tried to do is they tried to determine, where everybody was interested in going, because anthropology is, as I said, a big discipline, and there's 4 subfields. So they tried to get a feel for everybody where their interests lie. So it was pretty amusing. We got sort of like a refresher course on all the 4 subfields. So we did, like archaeology and cultural anthropology and linguistics and um, physical anthropology. And it was really amusing because, we're all anthropologists, but we all have different tastes and different interests. So those of us that loved archaeology were all excited when we did, the archaeology course of the applied anthropology, while the cultural anthropologists were just utterly horrified that we had to go out in the field and dig in the ground. um, and then we did, the cultural aspect, and all the cultural anthropology people were just so excited to be going out and doing interviews and observations, and the archaeology people, myself included, we were so uncomfortable. But it was interesting. Um, and one of the rewarding aspects of the master's program was doing an internship. So I did an internship with a museum, a different museum. Um, I did my internship with the Trinidad Museum. So it was interesting because I was now interning at 2 different museums, at the Morris Graves through um, the Museum Studies program, and then at Trinidad through the master's program. So it was definitely a rewarding experience because I got to experience um, 2 different types of museums. One's an art museum, the other is a history museum, a local history museum. So I got to learn how these 2 museums are run, um, how their administration works, how their docent programs work, how they plan, how they set up exhibits, how they take care of their collections. It was eye opening, and I truly enjoyed it. Um, so that that is how I got into my registrar work, Dana. I hope if that answers your question, how I went from anthropology to museum registrars. Um, so I graduated with, my master's and my certificate in museum studies. Um, and oh, question here. Oh, so there's a question from Rachel Hella Oakland. She's asking, I'd like to know the story of the Robert Madison Memorial Bridge in the Avenue of the Giants. Do I know anything about it? Um, I do not know much about that bridge, but it, I believe that possibly Katie or Dana would know. Um, but I'm not really familiar with the Robert Madison Memorial Bridge in Avenue of the Giants. Um, I mean, there's plenty of books and resources out there, I know, that uh, pertain to that subject matter. Um, there's also could. Oh, okay. Well, if you're new to the area. Oh, so welcome to Humboldt County. um, but there's definitely plenty of resources, local resources that you can reach out to learn more about the area. You could go to the Clarke Historical Museum. The Clarke Historical Museum has a webpage with lots of resources on it. The Historical Society has a website, and they have lots of resources dedicated to local history where you can find out a lot about the area. So, apologize that I can't answer that particular question. It's a good question. Um, where was I? Right. I was finishing the story of my background. So I graduated from Humboldt State and immediately got a job with the Trinidad Museum as a part-time registrar. Um, so one of the big projects that I did with the Trinidad Museum was authenticate the remnants of the original Trinidad Cross. Um, so Trinidad was discovered by the Spanish in 1775 while they were exploring the northwest coast. Um, so they landed and they planted a cross up on Trinidad Head, claiming the land for Spain. Um, and so the Trinidad Museum had this wooden box containing these large pieces of wood, and it was believed that they were the remnants of this original Spanish cross, but nobody was sure of that. So one of the projects that I undertook while at the Trinidad Museum was to authenticate this object. Um, I tried out a number of different resources to authenticate the piece. I started off looking into doing carbon dating, radiocarbon dating, um, mm, but when I took it in and they reviewed it, they said that the item was too degraded to get a good sample from it. So, if they tried to find a good sample, it would result in the complete destruction of this giant piece of wood. Um, my next option was taking it. What I did is I took it to the forestry department at HSU and asked if they could date the piece of wood using dendrochronology. And dendrochronology is essentially the study of tree rings. You can use tree rings to date a wooden item. Um, so they were able to, without damaging the piece, they were able to um, get a good sampling of tree rings from um, the piece of wood, and they were able to determine that yes, this tree, did live during the right time period and could have possibly been used to um, could have possibly been used for the cross planted up on Trinidad Head. So that was pretty exciting to learn. Um, and so I had that scientific data, and then the next step I took was trying to uh, track the history of this item, how it ended up at the Trinidad Museum. Um, so the story behind the cross piece is that it was given to the Trinidad Museum by the Clarke Historical Museum. So the Clarke Historical Museum gave this piece to the Trinidad Museum. Um, and the Clarke acquired the piece from the Veterans Memorial Building. So back in the 20s, the Veterans Memorial Building had a tiny little museum inside it. And in that little tiny museum, they had a piece of the original Spanish cross that was planted up on Trinidad Head. At least that's what the records say. And the Eureka Veterans Memorial Building was given the cross remnants by the Eureka Women's Club. So, and interestingly enough, it was the Eureka Women's Club that um, they were the ones that helped install the giant granite cross that's up on the head right now. So, up on Trinidad Head, there is a giant granite cross that is supposed to be the replica of the original wooden Spanish cross. So it was the women's club that set up this event, and they generated the money, and they bought the cross, and they paid for the workers to go up there and bring the cross up and clear the area and plant the granite cross. And it was a big event, and there was lots of people there. But the story goes is that some of the workers, when they went up there to clear the area, they found the remnants of the original Spanish cross. And then the remnants were held by the Eureka Women's Club for a while, and then they gave it to the Veterans Memorial Building. And then the Veterans Memorial Building gave it to the Clarke, and then the Clarke gave it to Trinidad. So that's the story of how the original Spanish cross pieces ended up at the Trinidad Museum. It was quite the adventure to track down that story. I had to go to multiple sources to find out how how that item ended up where it did. So it was quite exciting, and we are using all of that data. We are 99% sure that those wooden pieces are remnants of the original Spanish cross that was erected up on Trinidad Head. So that's a side story there, but it was, yeah, that was one of the projects I engaged in while working at the Clarke. But as a registrar, so let me describe what a registrar is. A registrar is someone who keeps and manages records. That is essentially the simplest description of what a registrar is. I mean, registrars can work in hospitals, they can work in schools, libraries, and in museum settings. Any places that have records, they are the record keepers. So a museum registrar is primarily concerned with the care and management of objects within their museum. So a museum registrar is responsible for we're responsible for one or more of the following activities. We are responsible for the acquisition process, so object entry and acquisitions, and then disposal of items if necessary. We're responsible for loan management, collections care, object packing and logistics, helping with exhibition installations. We're responsible for the locations and tracking of items in the museum. So we're really the ones behind the scenes. And that's essentially what I did at the Trinidad Museum, was helping to care and manage their the collections, as well as the the process is in acquiring items. Um, so the museum term for accepting items into the collection is accessioning. Accessioning essentially means the documentation process of cataloging an item and accepting it into the collection. Um, so that's one of the big jobs of a registrar. Um, and I did a lot of that and taking care of, the Trinidad Museum's collections. Um, and then it was last year, I believe, the Clarke, no, it was last year. The Clarke Museum had a position open for a registrar, and I immediately jumped on it. Um, was, I am a museum lover, and just, I love going to, all the museums in the area and visiting them, and I loved the idea of working at the Clarke Museum, so I immediately jumped on that, and was accepted, about 4 months ago. So my job as a registrar at the Clarke Historical Museum is to serve as information manager of the museum's artifacts. Um, I essentially, I do the same things that I did at the Trinidad Museum. I do the catalog process, the accessioning process of accepting items. I assist in um, setting up and taking down exhibits, the tracking and managing of items in the collection. Um, so, let me go into a little bit more detail. So the acquisition process for a museum, when a museum accepts a new item into their collection, it has to be reviewed, usually by the curator or director. And when they're reviewing an item to be accepted into their collection, the first thing they consider is, does this item fit the museum's mission? And a mission statement for a museum is essentially a statement of purpose. It's a statement of, this is who we are and this is what we do. So the museum mission statement for the Clarke Historical Museum is they display and educate. They do education and display and preservation for items and objects associated with Humboldt County. So anything linked to Humboldt County is within their domain. So if an item is submitted for review to the Clarke, the first thing that they would do is, does it fit the museum's mission? So is it any way associated, connected to, significant of Humboldt County? And the next thing to consider is, do we already have this object? Is it going to be a duplicate? What kind of condition is the object in? So those are all things that have to be considered when reviewing an item for acceptance. So if an item passes all of those questions, and is accepted, the next step is to fill out the documents, the gift receipt agreement, which is essentially a contract that the museum and then the donor signs. Essentially, the donor is handing ownership of the item over to the museum. And then the item would come to me as the registrar, And what I would do is I document and catalog everything associated with this item and input it into the museum's database. And the Clarke Museum has a past perfect database. It's a information database that's specifically geared towards museums. So first thing I do is, give the item an accession number or a catalog number, and that is an accession number is a unique number that's assigned to that particular object. So that particular object has that number and that number only. And then I would document uh, all of. I would give a detailed description of the item. I write out a detailed description of the item, and then record all of the information available associated with that item. Who the donor is, the history of the piece, any significant historical facts if they're available. Um, record the dimensions too, and then take a picture of it. And then all of that goes into the database. And then the next step would be to find a permanent home for that item in the storage spaces. So Dana asks, what's the most interesting or bizarre item that has come during your time as registrar? Um, Good question. Good question. Well, at the Clarke Historical Museum, an interesting item that was recently donated was a map atlas. And it was a map atlas, is it Metzger's? It was a giant atlas filled with maps of Humboldt County, um, circa 1940s, I believe. It was actually really it was pretty cool, um, because it was it was used by a surveyor, and he would have it was actually pretty big too. It was about yay big, and the covers front and back were leather, and all the pages were worn, and they had his notes written on them as a surveyor. So it was pretty interesting. It's always interesting when a museum acquires items, and there's always there's always little bits of um, personal things attached to it, like if somebody's written notes on the item or something. So it adds a bit more story to the item you're working with. So that was pretty cool, for the Clarke. But what is the most interesting or bizarre item that Trinidad Museum acquired while I was there? Let me think. There was So one day, a gentleman stopped by, and he dropped off this. it looked like like a giant lump of rock, actually, and the director slash curator, Patty Fleshner, was looking at it, and she's like, what is this? And he said it's an ore, or an oarlock, or it's essentially it's the metal piece that goes onto the side of a rowboat, and it's where the oars rest. When you row your rowboat, it's that like U-shaped metal piece, and essentially it had been sitting at the bottom of the Trinidad Bay for decades now, and it had like acquired a number of like barnacles and things had solidified to it, so it looked like a weirdly shaped iron piece with a metal with like rocks and barnacles attached to it. It was really weird looking, but it was really cool. And so that was an interesting item. It was a bizarre item um, that was donated to the Trinidad Museum that I accessioned while I was there. So it was pretty fun. Um, some other items. Oh, the while I was working as a registrar at the Trinidad Museum, some blacksmith tools were donated to the museum. A gentleman who lives in Trinidad, his backyard was apparently a blacksmith shop back in the 1800s, and he was doing some yard work, and he unearthed a number of old blacksmith tools, and he decided to donate them to the Trinidad Museum. So that was very interesting to accession those items. Um, so those are some interesting stories that happened while working as a registrar at the Trinidad and Clarke Museum. So, as a registrar, our jobs are to manage the collection, the records, and the items themselves. So, one of the big things is to know how to, care for a collection. Um, and an important thing to do when caring for a collection is inventory. So, inventory is a constant battle in any museum that I've volunteered or worked for. Inventory um, has been a big one because um, you always need to be aware of what you have in your museum and where the items are. Um, so the Trinidad Museum, um, while I was there, was one of the big projects they engaged in is um, transferring their old accessions database into a past perfect database. Um, so that required transferring all the data, their data from old database to new database. And one of the things that we needed to do was a full inventory. And a full inventory of their collection hadn't been done for many years. So that was exciting. um, uh, we there were items uh, that we could not find. Not first that we thought that they were missing, but after some investigation, we realized that they had been returned to their original donor for whatever reason. But funny story. So we were running around looking for these items and we couldn't find them. Um, so that's what happens if you don't have proper documentation of where your items are and what you're doing with them. Um, so, inventory allows us to track where our items are. It also allows us to do reviews. So, one of the things that museums do is deaccessioning. So, as I said, accessioning is the acceptance process of accepting an item into the museum, and deaccessioning is the process of removing an item from a museum. And there are many reasons why a museum would remove an item from their collection. Um, Maybe the item is um, the item does not fit within the parameters of their mission statement. For whatever reason, the item was accepted into the collection originally. They are now reviewing it and realizing, oh, not significant to Humboldt County. It's not part of Humboldt County's history. Why do we have it? So could be an item could be removed because of that, or because it's dangerous. Um, for it could be there could be contaminants or dangerous chemicals associated with the item that is dangerous for the people that work there, or the other items, the other objects within the collection. So those are a couple of reasons that a museum would deaccession uh, would deaccession an item, and a registrar is integral in that process of removing it an item from the collection. It has to be reviewed by the curator. Curator has to take a look at it, be like, oh, okay, we don't need this item, and then the registrar removes the item from the collection. So it could be the item can be either given back to the donor if that's possible, or it can be sold, or it can be donated to another institution, either educational or a museum or a library or something like that. So there's multiple ways of disseminating or deaccessioning items from a museum's collection. So Dana has asked, do you ever get nervous handling some of the more fragile items? Yes. Yes, I am always nervous when I'm handling fragile items. So, um, a registrar has to be aware of handling procedures. And handling procedures are usually common sense things. So, you always wear your gloves, and a mask if necessary. Um, and you have to, when you handle an object, you have to be aware of the components of that object if it has weak points. So you can either, pick it up with your hands, or have a tray that you pick it up with. Um, so handling procedures are something that you you do have to learn about, and we did learn about handling procedures was extensively covered in our museum studies program. Um, how to handle different types of objects, whether they be works of art like paintings or sculpture, or fragile like metal pieces or ceramic pieces or something like that. Um, you do have to learn proper handling procedures. Um, and like I said, common sense things. Always be aware of, you know, where your object is, and then where you are, and then in relation to everything else around you. So, um, there's horror stories of people, delicately carrying an object from one point to another, and then they run into a table or they trip over something and they drop it and it breaks, and oh no. So, always be aware of, always be conscious of the object that you're holding, and then always be aware of everything else around you. Um, so that's that's handling procedures for being a registrar. So, any more questions about what it means to be a registrar? I think I've covered everything. So, yeah, a registrar is essentially the records keeper of a museum. We manage the the records of all the collections, and we manage the collection, the items themselves. Um, One of the big things is to always be, aware of the collections, the items in the collection. What the museum has and where it's located. Um, so I've I've been a registrar at the Clarke for 4 months. So just gave me enough time to get started and to um, just become comfortable with the collections and the museums and the museum processes and all of that. I was just getting ready to start, on some big projects, and then the closures hit, and uh, the stay-at-home orders were issued. So I was a bit bummed about that. Um, but so the Clarke Historical Museum, um, has actually a lot of storage. So it's, 3 stories. There's the basement, and then the main floor, which is the exhibit area, and then this third floor, second floor, I guess, um, which is dedicated to storage. And I had was just getting used to the layout of the storerooms, um, before we were, you know, told to stay at home. So, my time is almost up. So, does anyone have questions about what a registrar does or what I do with the Clarke? um, it's a bit of a rambling story there, but I hope I covered, all of the important aspects of what it means to be a registrar. So, we are the people that take care of the collections, essentially. Um, the curator is essentially like the manager of the museum. There is actually a lot of overlap between what a curator does and what a registrar does. Um, so a curator, you know, takes takes care of the museum as a whole. Um, they usually plan out the exhibits, um, so they have to be aware of what the museum has in its collection. They also do a lot of um, they do a lot of interpretation and public relations and stuff like that. So they're a lot more visible, while registrars are in the back, behind the scenes. Um, so if that's my notes here. If there aren't any more questions, or if you have further questions, you can leave them on Facebook. Oh, last question. Dana, do you ever want to be a curator? Um, uh, Not really. I like what I do. I like I like working in the back behind the scenes with the collections. I like working with the items themselves. And curators, yeah, they do that. But a lot of their time is spent managing the museum and doing a lot of public relations stuff and stuff like that. So, not really my forte. Um, Katie does it very well though. So, nope, never really interested in pursuing being a curator. Uh, I'm quite happy being a registrar. So, that's that. Um, so be sure to like us on Facebook, and uh, if you want to support your local museum, you can leave a donation on through Facebook or the Clarke's website, clarkemuseum.org. Um, you can also become a member. There's a little tab on the website where you can review the different types of memberships. So I guess that's that. Thank you for attending my rambling chat about what it means to be a registrar. Be sure to tune in to our Ask a Curator next week. Same time, same place. So see you guys then. Stay safe and have a good day. Bye.